Well, welcome back. We are taking a pause this week on my new digital ministry kind of starter class to answer some questions. There's been a lot of things that have been commented and questions that have been emailed me, and I wanted to take some time to answer a few of those because we are 8 videos into this course on digital ministry. What does that look like for your church? We've talked about the first one was digital ministry and culture in your church. Then we talked about how the internet isn't all online, meaning it relies off of physical servers and how that should impact your strategy. We then looked at 3 approaches, kind of paradigms, the kind of front door, the anywhere, the hybrid approach, and which ones you should look at or which one you should select. The fourth one was about the thief on the cross is saved too, how even the thief on the cross is the minimal expression of what it means to accept Jesus Christ into your heart. But we don't thrive to be the thief on the cross. And so, yes, you can say digital ministry is an expression of ministry, but it doesn't mean we don't take our foot off the pedal of getting them face to face and how you kind of build that in or you kind of bake it into what you're trying to do. We looked at the 4 pillars of doing church online, both large, medium, small, and one-on-one. And you need to offer all those in your online approach to kind of make it really church. It's not just having a website or a Facebook group. It needs to be more robust and think bigger than just streaming your services. We looked at the digital Tower of Babel, how if you look at kind of down, up, there are better platforms to express the fullest expression of what community is. So like video is better than calling somebody. Texting isn't as good as a VR experience, and why you need to think about that when you're offering different things and how you're maybe encouraging your people in your online community to think about going offline or upping their game. So it's just kind of thinking about that in your strategy. We also looked at thinking about 3 and not just 1 with your platforms, both with your audiences and the platforms you pick. So you have people that are watching live, in the room, people watching live during the stream and watching days later. Then you have all these different platforms and how that comes. You pick your platforms based off of who you're trying to reach. And you should be a little bit more, the word we commonly use is omni-channel. It's about every channel, and you're selective and you're aware, and you don't get too dependent on one channel, because those channel like Facebook could change everything tomorrow, and then you might lose 70% of your audience. Kind of like investing. You don't want to have your portfolio like 40% into one thing, because that means that one thing could get killed and then you lose everything. And then last week we talked about online groups are the spark, and how you can structure online groups post-COVID, and how online groups are a really important expression of what community is. And so what I wanted to do is, that's kind of the summary. So if you haven't watched any of those, go back to the beginning, and I'm going to put a link down below or on the video to kind of watch this from the beginning. So please catch up if you haven't. But there's been a lot of questions that have popped up, and I wanted to just take some time, over some, coffee for me, and answer those. So Jim asked the question, in the medium-sized online group experience, is there a place for fun online experiences? What might that look like? Thought about getting somebody from being anonymous to in a live stream to be in a more social Bible study, and just kind of thinking through that. I do think, and I love this question, because I do think that there is something about online community where churches are a little bit too, I would say, business focused. And I think you do need to have fun. I always bring it back to, how did you experience church? What made it real to you? For me, I remember when I first started coming into church, it was a Saturday night service, and I came, and after church, people were skateboarding in the parking lot. At that time, I was like 13, 12. I skateboarded a lot, and I loved that they were skateboarding after service, trying to do kick flips and tray flips or whatever. And to me, that energized me. The same way it's just like having a fun game and doing something. So I do think that in your Facebook group and in your events, you need to figure out how to just kind of like relax and just play games together. So a great example of this is having informal conversations in Facebook Live, just going live after something. I go live sometimes. I've done this a couple times throughout the year after I run, and I'm like kind of sweaty, I'm a mess, and I just kind of start talking, and it's very casual. And the idea is that people new in my community can kind of anonymously see me and go, oh, look, Jay runs, I run, or I want to run. And it starts conversations that are a little bit more casual, maybe not so focused on like the weekend topic or maybe a Bible study that we're going through. We play games too. I do this more with my volunteers where I get on a Zoom call and I'll play games. A Kahoot, I think it's Kahoot.com. If you search Kahoot, you can do that type of games. Pictionary, you can have people share their screen on Zoom, use the whiteboard feature, and you can play a game. You can do all sorts of stuff. There's a bunch of Zoom game ideas. Etsy has a lot of PowerPoint games. I've actually paid. You can buy for like $5, like a Family Feud type of style game that they have it all worked up in PowerPoint. I've done that with stuff. But I do think creating events that are more informal and more fun focused is important, because I do think a lot of us, if you kind of go back in our own story with Jesus, we kind of understood who Jesus was, we understood what the church was, but it was probably through somebody acting very human that it became a real thing to us. I still remember my pastor, some of my most beneficial kind of conversations with him is he would take me to Costco, and we would just talk, and so how do you create those online? So I do that through games mainly and informal Facebook streams, but I think there's a lot more innovation there, Jim, that you can kind of walk down. Aaron asked, your mapping tool that you have, is that available commercially? Also, could you share the link? And yes, I'll share the link below. I think I responded to Aaron right away, but we use a tool right now called batchgeo.com. It's actually kind of expensive. It's about $100 a month. I know you can use Google Fusion tables. I will say that I wasn't able to get that to work. Maybe I'm not technical enough, but this mapping tool that he's referring to is, I wanted to provide a place where you could have people could see a map and find people and actually select their name and contact them to connect with people near them. And I wanted to build a habit where it's really easy to manage. And so I actually saw this first at, like meetup.com type of platform. That was something where it was very popular there. And then later, it was Elevation Church has like a mapping meet people type of platform where I got more inspiration from. And so what I did was I literally paid for the service with BatchGeo. And then what happens is I have a form on the site. So every time the form is submitted, I have a volunteer on my team that will manually update the map. So it's not very intelligent. We're actually trying to make it better, but BatchGeo is something you can just buy and you can make it a map. So I'll put a link if you want to see the map. We've had over 900 people put themselves on the map, and a lot of people connected and start groups through it. So it's a really cool offering. Brandy asked, really appreciate what you're sharing, and definitely a struggle that they've dealt with connecting people. So could you spend some time talking about reaching people as a church plant or someone without an established audience? How do you get in front of new people in a specific region or demographic? Really, really good question. For me, and I've helped a couple of church plants with this, I think there are two big things to do. One is to do some training with your core members on how to share what your church is doing. So both produce content that's shareable, like a story of like your vision, why you're launching this church, and then so produce some assets and then train your core members to share that content regularly. So I think that's a big part of, especially at a launch, it's that. The second part there is that I definitely would allocate funds, even if it's $100, spend some money advertising on Facebook and Instagram. I think that's totally worth it. It doesn't have to be a lot. Create something on your website where it's like details about our launch and maybe it's an email capture or something to stay informed when you launch, and then promote that page. Make sure that page looks like your community. Use language that you're in your community, and just run that ad. And I think most churches should be spending something every month on Facebook ads and Instagram ads. We spend something in the neighborhood of $500 a month just reoccurring, and then Easter and Christmas we usually spend a little bit more. I know some churches do more or less, but I think mobilizing your current members, like teaching them how to share and why to share, create assets for that. Like a story is really powerful. Like maybe it's a story from you, the church plant, lead, and going why we love this community, and then also some ads. I think that's the best way to do it. Outside of just having a viral thing, I think those are the best things you can do. Bob asked, what platform would be best for reaching young families? I'm totally new at this type of marketing online. So first off, it's all about who you're reaching. That platform answer might change depending on where you're at in the world, or what state you're at. And so, it might be WhatsApp, it might be Instagram, it might be a Facebook group. in some places Twitter. For me, young families, I think Facebook group and I think Instagram. Personally, I think most churches are not investing enough in their Instagram account. And so I think Instagram's probably the no-brainer just to kind of, and again, what's hard about that is it's a more of a visual platform. And so you have to graphically think more about it. You either have to have a designer help you or use a tool like canva.com to kind of help you. Also, Fiverr is a great tool that you can pay different people to do different things. But I definitely think Instagram's probably the answer to that. It's also a ever-changing answer too. There's always another thing coming up. I think a great, just generally another platform. It's not really like a social platform, but I think podcast. I think a lot of young families, they're busy, they're going around and they listen to podcasts, and I think a lot of churches should think about leveraging their podcast platform better, not just putting their sermon, but doing different types of events on that. I think audio is such a under-tapped market that I think it's definitely something that people should be leveraging more, because it's a passive way for them to listen, meaning it's not as big of a commitment, meaning that they're more likely to say yes. And so yeah, check out that. Aaron asked the question also, how have you been able to create community outside of things like Facebook groups? This is a really good question, and I got to tell you, I don't have a great answer. Facebook groups have been the most powerful thing to kind of facilitate that. I definitely send a weekly email to my community. I have my Facebook group, which is like my patio experience. I have Zoom type of events that are more smaller. I have Slack and Marco Polo, different types of environments that kind of build more up volunteers. But I would say as a large group experience, I think it's really hard to replace this. I know other places in the world, they might use WhatsApp group, Telegram. There's a bunch of different platforms, but I have found Facebook groups are kind of the best thing for that. Again, thinking about the large, medium, small, and one-on-one type of environments you're trying to create, the platform kind of does that in best, and Facebook groups tend to be the best because most people are on Facebook. I've explored in the past, there's some services that you can actually like pay to have like a Facebook group on your website, but it's not ideal. It's probably really good for like work environments, but this is the classic story of I think Zondervan had something called The City, if I remember, where it's kind of like a Facebook group replacement, but like nobody went to it. So it's really good for your members, like a Slack conversation or something, but it's not really good for casual people. They're not going to create an account with you. I do think there's a place for it. And I might see more people, there might be some kind of feature arise out of this, especially as Facebook and some of these platforms censor more people. There would be a drive to these third parties type of experiences, but Facebook groups are kind of the de facto thing that I'm using right now. I definitely monitor a lot new things, and I'm looking for something always, because you never know what's going to happen. Sam says, it says that there's actually kind of on this topic, it seems like there's an ever-increasing shift to social media against free speech. Recently, large mega churches have been flagged by social media. What do you see the future for social media restrictions and how this impacting the gospel message online? Interesting question. For sure, one thing that's really important is that there is Facebook, Instagram, all these platforms have billions of conversations that are happening. And so I think it's important to realize that there is a lot of automation that happens. Bots and AIs are flagging things. I've been flagged on Google from Facebook, and most of the time, 90% of the time, it's not personal. It's not attacking anything. It's just they're trying to, for example, a lot of churches have been flagged the past year, and because they are targeting people during COVID, and Facebook and Google see this as you're not trying to profit off of a bad situation, so their algorithm flags you because of that reason. And so I do think that Facebook and a lot of this AI isn't to the place that is good enough. But I definitely will say that will be an issue. I definitely see these organizations trying to restrict things. Google Grants is a great example of this, where they actually make you buy into before you can get your $10,000 of free of Google Grant money, you have to kind of agree not to discriminate against people. And for some churches, that might be deemed that you have to believe that people of the same sex can be married. And if your church believes opposite of that, you could be seen as you're discriminating. And so that's been like a gray area for a lot of churches. Some churches believe, well, we're not discriminating, so they can check that box. Some don't check that box. And so stuff like that will arise more and more. And so I think that's why it's really important for you to build your platform on these places, but don't make it your primary place. I think this is why having your own website is really important. Having a place where people come and stream on your website. You got to build that dominance there, where like people know, like we have at my church on our website a place where you can stream, and we see that as very essential. Yes, we still put our content on YouTube, on Facebook, but we also know that they could change the algorithm or change their policy any moment. So I think having your own place on your website where they go to, and then having an email list, I think those things are really important. So I do think as the world changes, there will be more restrictions, more control. You never know what's going to be around the corner. But I will say most of the flagging is not direct. This is the classic. Facebook and Google don't really care about you as an individual. They care about you as an aggregate. They care about you as like a user base that they can target and market and make money off of. You individually, it's not really personal. It's typically just some of their algorithms. But I think a website is really important, especially for streaming and building that. Romaine says, my hardest question that I've ever faced as online church leader is it possible for people to be excited about serving through online hosting as they would in some in-person format? I find myself relating to people who they want to serve in person, but at the same time, people still need to serve online. Yeah, I think a lot of online ministries or digital ministries struggle with building an online culture. I was just talking to another church about this right before I started recording this, that, before when I was a youth pastor, I wanted to be a volunteer on the youth team because I saw a bunch of college students serving the high school students, and I saw like a collective. And I think online, because everybody serves individually on their own time, it's hard to have that collective team atmosphere. And I think you need to build that online. You need to somehow build that community. So a couple ways you do that. You have regular meetings. Monthly meetings where you get all together on Zoom and you turn on your video and you have fun, you teach, you do the stuff. So you build that collective. You have like a Slack thread or some kind of messaging thread where you interact daily or regularly. You need to build a team environment. People serve because it's their church, but also because they feel cared for. And so people, by having the flexibility to be able to serve on your own time and serve at your home, there is less of this collective feel, and you need to build that culture somehow. And I have found the rhythm of having regular meetings is really helpful for me to get to know them, and also for them to get to know other people, and on those meetings having fun. But I think it is possible, but it takes work. And I will say that's one of the hardest things that I had to learn, especially coming from a youth background. I was so used to just getting coffee, people hanging out, and people hung out. I served because I got into ministry because there was this team that I wanted to be part of. And online, there really isn't that team dynamic naturally because different time zones, remote work, all that. I think that's why turning on your video, doing those things, you got to build that. And that comes on you as the leader to build that culture, that team culture. And then lastly, Tammy said, asking, what does your production team structure look like? How is it split upon online and in person? How do you feel about platforms, other platforms like Brighton On and Odyssey, I think? If we get censored and stuff, which are just aggregate platforms, other places you can post video. So again, on the second part of that question, yes, I believe your website is really important. I think you need to have places where people can kind of be beyond this. This is why a lot of churches like Vimeo, because you own that more and you can do more with that. I think you still need to have a presence on YouTube, but be aware, have a backup plan, be aware. I think if you're a smaller church, don't worry about it that much. If something happens, you can learn from the larger churches that kind of deal with that limitation. But on the structure side, really good question. So at my church, we have a central team that that production team doesn't report to me, but I influence that or I add value into that. And so what we do is that because we're a big church in our example, we want to be able to solve a bunch of different problems. And it doesn't make sense to have two teams, one team that reports to me and one team that reports to our main campus production team. And so our main worship pastor, all that production sits under him, and they have teams. They have a team that's just focusing on the online stream, and they have a team that's focusing on the house streaming, the stream that's going on the screens in the room. And so we have audio person, video. It's different. So people are producing it a little bit different. Obviously, if you're live streaming it, you're gonna be able to double dip there a little bit more. If you're pre-producing it, you might have more editors, so the structure is going to look very differently. But we try to rely off of the same people because we found that we can be really efficient with it, but we do have people just focusing on the online stream, but they report up to one person. Again, I know other churches that do different things. This makes sense for our structure. I'm not a production person. Again, I can speak into it and say, hey, make this bigger, do this, but it's not really my expertise, but that's how we do it. So really good questions. Thank you so much for adding feedback and adding your questions. Please, if you have any more questions, comment below. I'll try to do another one of these at the end. Next week, we're going to be talking about creating digital learning environments and the importance of building that community and learning together so that disciple making can happen. And I think you can do that online. If you've ever been part of like an online learning environment, like a seminary or an online school, I know it's possible, but there's some things you got to do to make it work well. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. Please, again, if you haven't, go back, watch the previous one. Send this series to somebody that should be learning about digital ministry. I'm creating these and I'm putting them up for free. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for engaging. So next week.